This is Newsday on the BBC. I'm Rico Hizon in Singapore. The headlines. President Trump says maximum pressure must be maintained on North Korea until it ends its nuclear program.
There is a bright path available to North Korea when it achieves denuclearization in a complete and verifiable and irreversible way.
The end of the Castro era in Cuba. Raul prepares to step down and the next president is named.
I'm Kasia Madeira in London, also in this programme. Moments of terror on board a US passenger jet, during which a female pilot is hailed a hero. And Paradise Lost, the Philippines island of Boracay, is waving goodbye to tourists.
Live from our studios in Singapore and London. This is BBC World News. It's Newsday.
Glad you could join us. It's 8 in the morning here in Singapore, 1 a.m. in London, and 8 in the evening in Florida, where President Trump and the Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe, have said that maximum pressure must be maintained on North Korea until it agrees to complete nuclear disarmament. The two leaders were speaking at the President's Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida. President Trump said he was hopeful his meeting with Kim Jong-un would be a success, but he was prepared if things go wrong.
If I think that it's a meeting that is not going to be fruitful, we're not going to go. If the meeting, when I'm there, is not fruitful, I will respectfully leave the meeting and we'll continue what we're doing or whatever it is that we'll continue, but something will happen. So I like always remaining flexible and will remain flexible here. I've gotten it to this point. President Moon of South Korea was very generous when he said if it weren't for Donald Trump, the Olympics would have been a total failure. It was my involvement and the involvement of our great country that made the Olympics a very successful Olympics. If you look at ticket sales prior to what took place with respect to North Korea, it was going to be a big problem, and it turned out to be a very successful Olympics. So we've gotten us here, and I think we're going to be successful, but if for any reason I feel we're not, we end.
So that was President Trump speaking about that prospective meeting with Kim Jong-un. Well, this is what Shinzo Abe had to say.
The situation surrounding North Korea, due to the decisive decision by President Trump on the first ever US-North Korea summit, is at a historical turning point. The past mistakes should never be repeated. On this point, President Trump and I were in full agreement.
Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe there. The BBC's Barbara Plett-Usher is in Florida, where the meeting between the two men took place.
I think what we saw there on the issue of North Korea, these two allies very much in lockstep, which will have been a relief for Shinzo Abe. I think he got quite a strong statement of commitment from President Trump that the United States was committed to Japan's defense, that the Americans would not release or ease their sanctions or provide any concessions to North Korea until there were concrete results from talks. These are things that Shinzo Abe wanted to nail down, and I think he got them. And otherwise, in terms of North Korea, you saw quite an effusive and prolonged statement by Mr. Trump about the abduction of the Japanese citizens, that he would really raise this in the summit, and he spoke about it at some length. So again, that was for Mr. Abe's benefit, because of course that's important back home. So I think on North Korea, the two men came out sounding like they were pretty much on the same page, and in that regard, Mr. Abe also said if the line was held on everything and if they could get movement on these talks, then Japan might be ready to open up diplomatic relationship with North Korea at some point. And he called the summit an historic turning point. So he also very much supported Mr. Trump in his move at this stage.
And apart from the abduction of these Japanese by the North Koreans, President Trump also said that negotiations are ongoing with Pyongyang, and there's a good chance that they'll be getting back 3 Americans from North Korea.
Yes, he said that they were talking about these 3 imprisoned Americans. He mentioned Otto Warmbier, of course, the American college student who was released last year and unfortunately in very poor condition and died afterwards. But it is something that Mr. Trump has made a priority for his administration to get back those who are imprisoned in North Korea, and he sounded reasonably optimistic that it might happen, but he didn't say anything definitive about whether this was going to be connected directly to the talks, whether he'd have to see the release before he moved forward. He didn't make that direct link between action on this and the summit being held.
Barbara Pless-Usher there speaking to Rico. She was in Florida where that press conference took place between Shinzo Abe and President Trump. Well, the BBC's Rupert Wingfield-Hayes is in Tokyo, and he said that the Japanese Prime Minister may have been disappointed that more progress wasn't made on the issue of trade.
We've seen several of America's most important allies, Canada, the EU and Mexico, getting exemptions from the steel and aluminium tariffs. And Japan is the one big important ally of America that was not given an exemption from these tariffs, which were mainly seen as being directed at China. And Mr. Abe was certainly hoping that in this meeting he would get some sort of concession from his good friend, Donald Trump. And yet he's got nothing. So on that front, on the trade front, Mr. Abe, as Barbara said, I think she's right, he's coming home with pretty much nothing. And President Trump's rhetoric on trade with China, with Japan, is very old-fashioned. I mean, he talks about Japan exporting millions of cars to America, which is true, and America being unable to export cars to Japan because of lots of barriers, and that's just not true. There are not barriers to American cars coming into Japan. It's just that American cars aren't very much liked in Japan. And also, Japanese companies produce even more cars in America than they export to America. So this is a very old-fashioned view of Japan, and it's one that Mr. Trump seems to be sticking to.
And so not getting that in terms of what Shinzo Abe was hoping for, but of course he had to stand there, he had to be warm about his best friend diplomatically. He did talk about the action and the understanding that President Trump had about all of those Japanese who were abducted in the 70s and 80s by North Korea.
Yes, we heard strong support for Japan's position on abductees, which is a very, very important issue here domestically. We also heard strong words of support for Japan's position that sanctions should not be eased on North Korea at all until there are concrete steps towards denuclearization. I think the concern here in Japan is that there has been a 180-degree turn on this policy by President Trump in the last few months without really consulting Japan at all, from tough sanctions and maybe military action to suddenly talking with North Korea pretty much without conditions. And Mr. Abe has had to do a 180-degree turn himself in his rhetoric, and he's basically tied himself to President Trump and America's policy on North Korea, and he's having to follow along, and it's making for some very uncomfortable, very sharp turns in rhetoric along the way.
Rupert Wingfield-Hayes there talking about that press conference, and of course lots of different lines coming out of that, so more analysis on our website, so if you want to have a look at that, do check that out. But now let's take a look at some of the day's other news stories. Let's turn to Cuba, where officials have announced a replacement for President Raul Castro, who is stepping down. He's ending 6 decades of Castro family rule. The new leader will be the current Vice President Miguel Diaz-Canel. Raul Castro will stay on as the head of the Communist Party, and he's expected to remain a powerful source of influence. Our Cuba correspondent Will Grant is in Havana.
Miguel Diaz-Canel is absolutely a disciple of the Castros. He was a regional party leader in the Villa Clara province. He was education minister. You know, there is no plan to in any way unpick the socialist project or the one-party communist state in Cuba. You know, we can be sure of that. but economically he's facing some quite difficult choices, and he's going to have to take some decisions quite quickly. There's a dual currency here, for example, which splits people into those who are paid in the local currency and those who are paid in a currency that's tied to the dollar. That's not very workable. It's not working very well. It's hurting a lot of ordinary Cubans. He needs to deal with that quickly, but it could cause inflation. So he's going to have a series of quite important economic choices to make very soon, and I think that will be his first obvious step that would sort of differentiate him from the Castros.
Well, Grant there on the end of the Castro dynasty. Also making news today, Turkey's president has announced that elections will be held in June, more than a year earlier than planned. Recep Tayyip Erdogan said that developments in Syria and throughout the region meant that his country urgently needed an executive presidency. The U.S. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis is accusing the Syrian government of delaying a visit by chemical weapons inspectors to the site of the alleged gas attack in Douma. He said that Syria had used such delays in the past to remove evidence. The alleged attack led to U.S., French and British airstrikes on Saturday. Indonesia has proposed a new law to limit cash transactions as a way of curbing corruption. The regulation would ban payments for anything costing over $7,000. Officials say that the widespread use of cash makes it harder to control money laundering, bribery and also terrorist financing. Taiwan has accused China of saber-rattling after it conducted live-fire military exercises in the Taiwan Strait. The one-day drill comes amid growing tension in the region, and it follows China's largest ever naval display last Friday. A Hollywood movie has screened to officials and diplomats in Saudi Arabia as the kingdom prepares for the return of cinema after more than 35 years. The showing of the blockbuster superhero film Black Panther is part of a series of tests before theaters are open to the public next month. NASA's newest planet-hunting space telescope has been launched from Florida. Costing more than $300 million, the satellite will search for potential extraterrestrial life by scanning thousands of planets beyond the solar system. The Falcon 9 rocket is designed by the private company SpaceX, returning to Earth to be reused. And when it comes to solving China's pollution problems, well, it seems that bigger is better. Now, this is a giant air purifier. As you can see, it's the size of an industrial smokestack. It's been put up in the smog-plagued city of Xi'an, and it towers between high-rise buildings. This 60-meter device is said to be capable of cleaning up to 8 million cubic meters of air every single day.
Air safety officials are investigating the death of an airline passenger who was killed after being almost sucked out of a plane mid-air. The Southwest Airlines Boeing 737 was flying from New York to Texas when one of its engines exploded at 32,000 feet. The blast shattered the window she was sitting next to. Nick Bryant has the details.
Imagine the relief of the passengers on board after this Southwest Airlines Boeing 737 landed safely on the ground. They'd heard the engine explode at 32,000 feet. They'd seen a window smashed open by the debris. They'd watched as a fellow passenger was partially sucked out of the cabin after the rapid depressurization. One of the 149 people on board, Marty Martinez, captured the high-altitude drama.
First there was an explosion, and then almost immediately the oxygen mask comes down, and then probably within a matter of 10 seconds, the engine then hit a window and busted it wide open. It felt like it was free falling, and of course everyone's freaking out, everybody's crying.
At the controls, Captain Tammy Jo Schultz, a highly experienced former Top Gun Navy pilot. She radioed for help, showing extraordinary calm.
Okay, could you have the medical meet us there on the runway as well? We've got injured passengers.
Injured passengers, okay, and is your airplane physically on fire?
No, it's not on fire, but part of it's missing. They said there was a hole and someone went out.
I'm sorry, you said there was a hole and somebody went out?
Airport 10, there is a hole in this side of the aircraft.
Passengers managed to pull the woman sucked out of the window back into the cabin, but she died from her injuries. She's now been identified as Jennifer Reardon, a bank executive from New Mexico, a 43-year-old mother of two who'd been on a business trip to New York. Investigators are looking into what's the first fatal US airline accident in almost a decade. The early signs point to metal fatigue causing a fan blade to break off. Even before this incident, European authorities had called for non-urgent inspections of these American and French-made engines, a workhorse of the global aviation industry. US authorities are now likely to follow suit. This could have been a catastrophic accident, and the pilot who landed this stricken aircraft is being hailed as a heroine. Nick Bryant, BBC News, New York.
An extraordinary story. You're watching Newsday on the BBC. Still to come on the programme, the Philippines' most popular island is waving goodbye to visitors. Boracay is taking a 6-month tourist break.
Welcome back, everyone. You're watching Newsday on the BBC. I'm Rico Hizon in Singapore.
And I'm Kasia Madeira in London. Our top stories. President Trump says that a campaign of maximum pressure will continue on North Korea until it agrees to complete nuclear disarmament.
And Cuba prepares for the end of the Castro era as members of the National Assembly name the next president, Miguel Diaz-Canel. Now, you may think that moving from a career running an international modeling agency to one aimed at highlighting the plight of human trafficking is quite a jump. But for Katie Ford, former CEO of Ford Models, there were all too many similarities. She was inspired to set up Freedom for All, an organization which helps men, women, and children who were trafficked escape and start a new life. Well, these are just a few of their stories.
I didn't know this was what I was going to experience over there because they didn't tell me this is what you are going to do.
He lied to me. He told me I'm going to be a secretary there. I'm going to work in a hotel. So when I reached there, it wasn't like that. I said I wanted to come back, and he said I should pay before I can come back. I found out it wasn't the company work that they promised me. It was maid work.
I told the woman I want to go back home. She said, no, you can't go.
I remember one day she told me if I don't work hard, I won't go back home. She would kill me there.
The woman keeps telling me I can't go unless I finish with a 2 years contract. So I cried, seriously, I cried.
They will insult you. They will spit on you. They will even beat you.
This little girl, she's 19. She's been raped by the employer. The wife gave her poison to drink.
Earlier, I spoke to Katie Ford in Manila. She says human trafficking is indeed a serious global issue.
There are 40 million people who are trafficked and in modern-day slavery today.
And where, Katie, are the biggest problems in the world? In which continents?
Well, the biggest is India, actually, as a country, but that's partially because of the size of the population. And it's a problem everywhere.
You are currently in Manila to speak in a forum. How serious is the problem there?
Well, you know, so many people travel abroad from the Philippines. They travel abroad for work. And when you travel abroad for work, it means that you are potentially vulnerable. And that was the part about human trafficking that I could really understand as a model agent, because we had the young people who came and worked with us from all over the world. And they ended up living with us, and we protected them.
And how do you protect them? And how do you give these victims a new start in life?
Well, for the survivors of trafficking, it depends where they're from and what they need. But in many cases, as from the Philippines, they need a job where they're safe. And many receive jobs that are safe. As a solution to the problem that that those women experience, we're creating a recruitment business in Dubai called Housekeeping Company that will protect women who are domestic workers.
And tell me, Katie, you are a former modeling guru. How do your skills in the modeling industry make a difference in your advocacy?
Well, you know, I understand people from all over the world. I've worked with people from all over the world who came to us. The part about the hope and a dream of a better life also is something we can all understand. We know people have traveled or come to our countries for work. And everybody does that because they see the opportunity of a better job.
Katie Ford there, the former CEO of Ford Models, who's since set up the organisation Freedom for All. Now, the dramatic growth of tourism in Southeast Asia, driven by Chinese travellers and low-cost airlines, is imposing an intolerable strain on the most popular destinations and forcing governments to consider measures to protect them. None, though, has gone as far as President Duterte of the Philippines, who's ordered the closure of the country's most popular holiday island, Boracay, for 6 months, starting this week. Our Southeast Asia correspondent, Jonathan Head, is there, and he sent this report.
Boracay has it all. White sand, warm, clear water, and balmy weather. The first tourists 50 years ago described a miraculously untouched beach resort. But they were followed by hundreds and then thousands more. Today, over 2 million visit this narrow, palm-fringed strip of land every year, causing an unplanned building boom and traffic jams. And most worrying of all, serious pollution from inadequate sewage treatment. So President Duterte has come up with a characteristically dramatic response: immediate closure.
Boracay isn't alone in its environmental difficulties. In fact, right across this region, beaches in particular are being swamped by a growing tidal wave of tourists. But nowhere else has the government taken such drastic action as shutting down an entire resort island. Necessary, says President Duterte, but it has stunned the people who live and work here.
More than 30,000 people live on Boracay, many migrants from other parts of the country drawn to jobs here. This beach masser is worrying how she will pay her son's college fees when the tourists leave. But if that's the president's choice, she said, there is nothing we can do. This man says he's hoping the government will give him a replacement job to support his wife and 2 children. Architect Lara Salaver has drafted a petition signed by 1,000 local residents to President Duterte, pleading with him to postpone the island shutdown by at least a month.
Sad, shocked, and thinking what to do, you know, and hoping that the president will reconsider his closure order. Thinking and really praying that he will consider, because there are a lot of people will be affected.
The president sent his spokesman, Harry Roque, to Boracay to explain how the 6-month closure would work.
Can you explain why President Duterte insisted on such a sudden closure of Boracay, giving the locals very little time to prepare, rather than the original proposal for a 6-month preparation period?
It was the only way to do it. It's a drastic police measure intended to protect the environment. The president said, I will spend public money for the welfare of the local people, but he will not subsidize the rich resort owners.
So can a 6-month hibernation restore Boracay to its former pristine beauty? The government is promising some basic infrastructure work during the break and tougher planning rules. But there's also talk of building huge new resorts and casinos here. This will not be a return to the quiet, tropical idyll of days gone by. Jonathan Head, BBC News, Boracay, the Philippines.
And you've been watching Newsday on the BBC. I'm Rico Hizon in Singapore. Stay with us. We'll be meeting India's youngest billionaire in the final installment of Asia's Tech Titans to find out how his company is helping the cash crisis.
And I'm Kasia Madeira in London, and in London a huge production opened in the West End. Lots of speculation about Tina the musical. Well, it hit the stage with songs and the story of Tina Turner's life and career. Even Tina turned up herself to see it. So let's end the show with a bit of music.